Hello students, we are going to see the chapter 2 of the Unit 8. This chapter 2 is about the Spanish hegemony. The Spanish hegemony took place in the 16th century under the kingdoms of Carlos I and Felipe II. Carlos I was the son of Juana la Loca, who was of her own the daughter of the Catholic monarchs. She was supposed to be the queen, but she was declared ill. With Carlos I and Felipe II, we're going to see their internal and external conflicts during the 16th century. The reign of those two kings meant the hegemony of Spain because they were the most powerful country in Europe and they had dominions in half of the European country and in many other places around the world. Starting with Charles I or Carlos I of Spain, and he was at the same time King of Germany or Emperor of Germany. That's why he has two different names, Carlos I de España, Carlos V de Alemania. In 1516 he became the King of Spain because he was the grandson of Ferdinand el Católico when he died, and in 1520 he did the same with the Germanic Empire because he was too the grandson of Maximilian I. Putting together the territories of the two parts and sides of the family, he had a huge inheritance, o sea, un legado inmenso. Here we have the European territories that inherited Charles I. Just in Europe, the lands of the Iberian Peninsula, great part of the Central Europe, the Germanic Empire, Flanders, Franco Condado, the south of Italy, the part of the north of Italy too, Austria. The conflicts Charles I had to face were both internal and external. In internal case, it was in Castile, it was the revolt of the Comuneros, and in Aragon, the revolt of the Germanians. In the case of the foreign policy or external conflicts, he has to fight against France, the Turks, and the Protestants. Studying with slightly more detail the internal conflicts of Charles I, it started at the very beginning in 1517 when he first came to Spain because he was considered a foreigner. He was considered a foreigner because he were not born in Spain, he born in the Low Countries. He didn't speak Spanish, and his assistants, his consulars, they were Flemish, they were not Spanish ones for the high post. In addition, he increased the taxes to pay his foreign policy, to pay the wars he was having in Europe. And that situation led to the two conflicts that happened a few years after he came in the 1520 and 21. In Castile, it was the revolt of the Comuneros. They were people of the cities and they wanted to keep the autonomy of the cities, and that's why they fought against Carlos I. And in Aragon, there was the revolt of the Germanías. It was a social revolt between the bourgeois and the nobles, and Charles I fought in the side of the nobles. The three leaders of the revolt of the Comuneros in Castile, they were Bravo, Juan Bravo, Padilla, and Maldonado. And maybe someday you will see that there are in the city center of Madrid three streets together that are called like that: Juan Bravo, Padilla, and Maldonado. They were executed after the revolt of the Comuneros, and here we have a very famous painting of those three characters. Now, moving to the external conflicts, I have to say first of all that Charles I was in constant war. He was in war against the three main enemies: the French, the Turks, and the Protestants. In the case of France, the country France was surrounded by the Habsburg territories. Habsburg is the dynasty that was ruling in Spain. France and Spain, they fought over the control of the north of Italy, and Charles I won, and he annexed Milan to the Habsburg Empire. In the case of the Turks, they were a threat, una amenaza, in Central and East Mediterranean, and Charles I, fighting against them, he annexed Tunis in the north of Africa. In the case of the Protestants, we have to take into account that Charles I, he was the fifth of Germany because he was the German emperor. He had many princes, and he was supposed to be the king, and they, the princes, They first converted to Lutheranism and later demanded autonomy from the emperor. He didn't accept that, and they were fighting for many years. But after many wars, Charles I had to recognize the religious freedom in Germany. It was signed, firmado, in the Peace of Augsburg. And after so many conflicts, in 1556, Charles I retired and he abdicated the throne, and he went to Extremadura, to a monastery of Juste, to his last 2 years because he died in the 1558. He divided his territories into two parts. The Spanish Empire gave it to Philip II, and the German Empire that he gave to his brother Fernando. Here we are the territories that inherited Philip II, that were the ones which is in orange in the map. He inherited Países Bajos, Franco Condado, Milan, the island of Cerdeña, and the south of Italy, including Sicily. He obviously had the Iberian Peninsula territories, including Portugal, because he was declared the successor of the Portugal's king, because that king didn't have a son or daughter. And the second Habsburg king that Spain had in the 16th century, Philip II, he also had internal and external problems or conflicts. The first ones were the revolt of the Moriscos, la revuelta de las Alpujarras. Alpujarras is a place in the province of Granada. And the external conflicts he had to face against the French, the Turks, the Protestants too, in the Low Countries, in Países Bajos, against the English people, and the conflict with the annexation of Portugal. The main internal conflict was the revolt of the Moriscos in the 1568 in Granada, the Revuelta de las Alpujarras, and the cause was a law that was passed. It was called the Pragmatic Sanction, and this law meant that there was a higher pressure to the Moriscos. The Moriscos were all Muslim people who had converted to Christianity, and they were forced to abandon their culture, not just their religion, but their culture. They were forbidden the Arab culture, the language, the clothes, the music, the baths, their names, and they were forced to learn Spanish. The consequence of this revolt was that first Philip II put an end to the revolt. He controlled the revolt, but the Moriscos, the ones who survived, they were dispersed, fueron repartidos to other cities of Spain in order to avoid new revolts. Philip II was also constantly in war against many enemies. Their external conflicts he had to face were against France, and they fought, and there was a decisive battle won by Philip II. The Battle of Saint-Quentin was in France. Saint-Quentin is in France, next to Low Countries, and he had to fight against the Turks too. And the main battle was the Battle of Lepanto, in which Cervantes himself was fighting in the side of obviously the Spanish. That war was won by Philip II too. Philip II was so happy because having won that war, the Battle of Lepanto, that he looked at the day of that battle, that was the San Lorenzo Day, and San Lorenzo was a Christian who was burnt into a grill. The grill, as you know, has this shape. The other conflicts that Philip II had during his times were against the Protestants in the Low Countries, against the English people, and with the annexation of Portugal. Against the Protestants in the Low Countries, Philip II was seen as a foreigner, and the Low Countries had an expansion of the Lutheranism. This, in the policy field, meant that they, in the Low Countries, asked Philip II for more autonomy. Philip II didn't accept, and they started wars, and the solution or the conclusion finally was that the half of the Low Countries were divided, and the north, the United Provinces, declared themselves independent. In the case of England, there was a war between Spain and England because first of all, the English people supported the Dutch, the people in Low Countries, and two, that day the English sent pirates to attack the Spanish ships that were coming from America to Spain full of treasures. Philip II decided to invade England, but the disaster for him was that that army, that huge army, uh, couldn't get to England because of a storm, and the English people won that battle even without moving a finger. But that army couldn't even start the fight because of a storm, and the English people won that battle without moving even a finger. And finally, in the 1598, Philip II died in the monastery of San Lorenzo del Escorial, and he was succeeded by his son, Philip III.